Some of you may know that the UCU branch at the University of Liverpool have been on strike for the past 3 weeks, over 47 proposed redundancies for colleagues in health and life sciences. You can find out more about it looking at the UCU account below the picture over here. This is a picture of some of us when we were on strike. Our action has actually forced the university to reduce those under threat to 24, but it's still not enough. So we're about to begin an assessment and marking Boycott to bring this number to 0. I think those of us working in EAP assessment are also aware of some of the unrealistic demands being made of our work. And the recent action has kind of encouraged me to believe that we can get more confidence in what we do and push for better conditions through collective action. And I think this network could be a part of that. Okay, introduction over to you, Eddie.
Great, thank you very much, Rob, and yeah, applaud the work you and your Liverpool colleagues are doing over there with that collective action. So yeah, thanks for that, and thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see so many people here and so much interest in this. I think there's been a really good response, which is really reassuring, I think, across all of the colleagues here. Firstly, we were keen to kind of remind ourselves and the group of the value, the importance of pre-testing, piloting, trialing. We might as well combine them all. But I'll say a bit more about the terminology shortly. But yeah, why it is a worthwhile process and why an inter-institutional collaboration or group around this makes a lot of sense. So in Anthony Manning's 8-stage EAP test design cycle, some form of road testing or tryout is featured twice. As you can see down the bottom left-hand corner here, the evaluating, prototyping and piloting, and the EAP field testing. And it's right that it features as a significant part of EAP test design in creating valid and reliable assessments. And beyond EAP, likewise with the Association of Language Testers in Europe, ALTE, in their manual for language test development and examining, it has a section on these stages. And that is well worth exploring further as well. Now, the term for ALTE, the term piloting for them is an often in-house stage of the process, gathering the views of a small number of colleagues or people in your test design team. This could be proofreading, could be formatting checks, it could be scrutinizing test items and test questions and the task design. And I think that's it's what kind of Manning is referring to some extent in that first stage of his with the piloting with peers. But this could also be comments from external examiners, maybe lecturers from faculties of the departments, and maybe, of course, gathering views from colleagues across a network like ours. Pre-testing, on the other hand, for ALTE is a little bit different, and that is objectively, or usually for objectively marked items. So receptive tests, probably more likely. Larger numbers of live test takers, similar in level to the final test taker population and in similar test conditions, with, of course, kind of sufficient numbers to enable some sort of meaningful analysis. And I think this is often, in fact, closer to what people have in mind when using the term piloting or pilot testing. Can people keep an eye on the waiting room, by the way? I can see people coming in.
Yeah, I've got that, Eddie.
Brilliant, thank you. And then trialing, finally being smaller scale. Again, this is from ALTE's perspective. Trialing being smaller scale with students similar to the final test takers, but more subjective items, so perhaps productive skills, possibly much more likely to be collecting qualitative data, you know, like discussing essay questions, for example. Then again, if we turn to Designing and Analyzing Language Tests by Nathan Karp, so another important text in the field, he also emphasizes the value and how important these stages are, but he does essentially suggest that these three terms are interchangeable and used interchangeably. And I think in practice that is often the case. He leads with piloting though, pilot testing. And whatever terms we decide to use as a group, and just so that everyone is clear, for today, we are going to be using the term pilot testing. But whatever terms we use, this gives a bit of a flavor of the kind of type and scale piloting, that is available and that is in use. And I think it's important to note that the amount and type of piloting that goes on will vary according to purpose of the test, depending on the resources available to the test writers, to the department, and of course the test construct as well. But what we really hope that this group can do, this network, is firstly to help us better understand the value of piloting and how to do it well, and B, to facilitate and enable us to do it via reciprocal help, reciprocal relationships. And if byproducts of this is that, it means institutions are working together and building relationships, then fantastic, and learning about each other's test design process, then they are all super byproducts. So why is it a crucial stage then of the test design cycle, or why should it be a crucial stage? Well, open response questions, firstly, they can often be open to a lot of interpretation. So pilot students we can explore whether pilot students are responding in the way that you want the test to be testing those learning outcomes. Are students able to follow the instructions and the prompts? This is something surprisingly easy to get wrong when all the focus is on the kind of crafting of the test items. This is an important one, I think, for item-based tests or anything using multiple choice questions, for example. I've always found through my previous piloting with partnering institutions that relatively basic statistical analysis can tell us an awful lot about the difficulty and the performance of the test and the items within it and the questions within it. We're not going to go into detail today about how to test the test and item facility analysis and discriminator analysis and things such as that. I know John Slatt does an excellent introduction into that with his roadshows, and Carolyn Westbrook's MOOC, Language and Testing MOOC, has a nice intro to that as well. But it's also something that we could perhaps explore further across this network, across this group, maybe a workshop down the line, for example. Connected to that, it can help us judge the reliability, the dependability of it, and perhaps form cut scores before we then deliver it operationally. If you're piloting anything which is using a rating scale, an analytical rating scale, then it's an opportunity to find out how well that scale is working, whether it's working well or not, and any adjustments that are needed. More relevant than ever right now, I suppose, with online exams, some sort of road testing of the technology involved is usually crucial. For example, server load on when you've got large test takers accessing exam files, for example. And finally, I think all of these, I think any amount of piloting and the subsequent or resulting benefits that come out of it that I've just gone over, I think together can form part of the body of evidence that can be used to defend your test. And as language test writers, we might need to defend our tests to all manner of stakeholders, whether that's the test takers themselves, whether it's our management, whether it's external examiners, whether it's ongoing university departments, maybe even UKVI. And this is an important part of doing that and forming that body of evidence. But it's difficult. It's difficult to do. Why many test design teams do not or cannot pilot test to the extent that they would like. And I've just seen the first line of the comment in the chat around security. And I think one of those major issues is indeed test security. When you're testing online or face-to-face, if you're limiting your piloting to within your own department, your own institution, you then carry an inherent risk that the pilot test taker population is mixing with the future operational test taker population. It only takes one student to undo all your hard work. If word gets round of the content, test questions themselves, it risks rendering the test unusable. It's also difficult to find appropriate test taker groups. So not only a group that you can be confident is not going to be mixing with the future test takers, but of course also one that has the right numbers or enough students and is roughly at the right level to make that test meaningful. And a third significant challenge is staff being given the time, the resources to run pilots. Piloting might be perceived by some in management as something of an added luxury, perhaps something that might not be essential in that test design cycle. So it might be a case of needing to convince or educate certain, kind of improve assessment literacy or assessment awareness of the role of piloting, especially for high stakes tests. So that is why we felt some form of structured, organized network of willing collaborators who can offer reciprocal help would make a lot of sense. And judging by the response when we sounded our interest around this, many others do too. Not only with the lend of students, so to speak, for full-scale pilot testing, but also perhaps helping one another, test writers helping test writers. So recently, Rob and Will of Liverpool University, as Rob was referring to at the start, collaborated with myself and Madeline Hall, Maddie Hall from York. We'd never met in person. This was all via Zoom, and this was all born out of that initial call for interest to the piloting network. So they're going to tell you a bit more now about how the collaboration worked and their experience of the piloting that they carried out together. Okay, Rob, am I over to you?
Thanks, Eddie. Yeah. Can we have a next slide? Great. So I'm going to talk through, well, Will and I are going to talk through the process of the pilot from the Liverpool perspective. This slide is just an overview of the test we were working on at Liverpool that we wanted to pilot. The test itself isn't really the focus of the talk, but we just wanted to give you a kind of a rough idea about what it was that we were piloting. So we called it a kind of academic listening test. The aim was to identify a B2 level of performance for a pre-sessional cohort of students. In the test, the students listen to the lecture, a short lecture twice. They take some notes and they write a summary. And the summary is what we use to arrive at a score. So it's more that kind of qualitative data with a rating scale that Eddie was talking about earlier. In terms of timing of the sort of pilot, Eddie and I started talking about this in November within TAFSIG. Then at the end of January, we piloted the test at York with 4 classes and with 49 students. Will, me and a colleague of ours, Aldona Norcus, ran that pilot. And then we used the data over the next few months to make the changes to the test, which went live in May and June this year. Okay, next slide. So what we wanted to learn from the pilot, these are just some of the things we wanted to learn from the pilot. I won't go through them all, don't worry. But the 3 main questions we had were how usable the test was for teachers, how usable the test was for students, and then what does the pass-fail performance look like? These were particularly important for us because we'd never run a test like this or developed a test like this before. So we really wanted to understand about what kind of language skills and emotions as well that the test kind of elicited. So on the right, in that right-hand column, you can see some of the things we did to find this out. So for the teacher's experience, we asked everyone who kind of administered the test to annotate the examiner script. To find out about students, we had a post-test questionnaire immediately after doing the test with these questions. So for example, one of the things we wanted to know was whether students used captions or subtitles during the test, because we had no idea about what the frequency of this would be. And the final one about the pass-fail was probably the most difficult task for us. And we used the IALTA online resources for this, which were really helpful. And we sorted the summaries into kind of pass-fail groups using our learning outcomes. I think Will is going to talk now about a bit more of a reflection on that.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Next slide. Yeah, so I think Eddie pointed out at the beginning, the importance of forming a reciprocal relationship, and it was something that we were very aware of, actually, that we were going into another institution, and so we really wanted to make it beneficial for both parties as much as possible, and also the students as well. And so after we spent some time liaising, and this is what we came up with. So we offered to do a live lesson, or several live lessons actually, and that help the teachers, with their teaching load, and also the idea was that it kind of fitted into what the students were doing. So we were actually teaching, we taught them note taking. So we focused on a specific skill. And we also offered the students like a Q&A discussion to give them the chance to voice any opinions that they had about the test as well at the end. And we also promised to give them some individual feedback as well to try and make it as developmental as possible. And next slide. And so these are just some of the things that we learned from the experience. First and foremost, it takes a lot of time. Like Eddie mentioned, you do need to have managers that are on board and willing to allocate the proper workload. We had to spend a bit of time trying to convince them that it wasn't a luxury, that it was a very necessary thing to do. And yeah, just another one of the things that took a lot of time. Actually, Rob was very generous. He took this on. He spent the time giving the individual feedback to the students, and that was actually something that we reflected on. Perhaps that could have been group feedback, because it did turn out to be very time consuming doing that. The liaison, we did put a lot of effort into the liaison beforehand, but that really seemed to work, because when we went in, we felt very welcome from the teachers, and we didn't feel like imposters or outsiders, and the students seemed really motivated in the lesson as well. So that seemed like it paid off. But one thing we didn't do, it slipped our mind really. We didn't ask the students for their individual IELTS scores, which possibly could have helped for benchmarking. Although obviously there's issues with kind of self-reporting of IELTS scores there. Forms was very useful for collecting the data. It did that very efficiently. And then finally, a really good bit of advice that we got from another institution actually was to involve the teachers who were going to be teaching the lessons and the tests, to actually involve them in doing the pilot. So some of the teachers came along and did the pilot with us, and that really helped going forward when we actually came to roll out the actual test with standardization, and they were really invested in the test being a success. So yeah, I could really recommend that. So now I'll pass on to Maddie for her perspective from the other end.
Okay, thank you, Will. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to sort of take up what Will said about this idea of it being reciprocal and giving something to the students. So from my perspective as the module coordinator, my first thought was, how valuable would this be to our students? Obviously, we can recognise the value of piloting, but would they recognise it as valuable to them? So our judgment was that, of course, it's valuable. I'll come back to how we we got the same judgment from the students. But because we felt it was valuable, we had to think about whether it should be voluntary or compulsory. And being valuable, we decided compulsory. So talking to Eddie about it, from previous experience, we have done some piloting for other institutions before where we've made it voluntary, and we got a lot of sign-ups. Students were quite keen to sign up for it, but not quite so many turn-ups when it came to the actual piloting itself. So that experience kind of certainly convinced me that it would be better to be compulsory. So making it a serious part of the course that the students would be expected to attend meant that it really did have to convince the students that it was something that they were going to find valuable, and therefore we had to make sure that it fitted with the module. And in fact, coincidentally, but partly, coming out of the liaison was that it really did fit with our module. There were three themes that the piloting used, the tests used, and all three of those themes fitted with our weekly themes. So they were either something that we had done previously, were doing that week, or were going to do in a week or so's time. So they were very much kind of themes that the students would recognise as being part of their scheme of work. Also, the actual test itself, being a listening test, it fitted very well with our own kind of 4 skills input. They were used to having some listening input each week. So we just replaced our usual listening lesson with the pilot. It meant a little bit of scheme of work juggling just in terms of where that lesson came in the week, but that wasn't significant. And so it fitted well, and we could really sell it to the students, and they made their own judgment that it was useful. And I think that was you know, instrumental in them being motivated. I think there's a question actually in the chat box about the difference in motivation between the piloting students and the actual students. I think that our students took it as seriously as they did any kind of mock exam. So and from feedback from Rob and Will, it seems that they were very motivated. In order to sell it to them, so the value to the students, we were upfront with them about why piloting is done, and explained to them that it was reciprocal and that their own tests would be piloted, and therefore it would help them to feel reassured that how they were being tested was fair and valid because it had been pre-tested in the same way that they were going to do for this other institution. It was also the case that this particular test was very similar to the way that we would be assessing our students at the end of the module. I mean, that's not really coincidental. Obviously, these tests are developed in order for the washback effect. So to develop their skills in note-taking, in listening for key points, in writing summaries. So we test them in a very similar way. So they could see that comparison with the tests that they were going to have anyway. So it was good skills development because it was a proper lesson, and it was also good exam practice for them. We also sold it in terms of them having this opportunity to have guest lecturers coming in, guest tutors, you know, a fabulous experience. Their own tutor was also there. So it was kind of very much part of the course and very serious. It was in the announcement for the week that we gave them. We give them an announcement each week of what's coming up, and that was part of the announcement, of course. It was in there with the scheme of work. So it was a proper part of the module. It was a proper lesson. And they were going to get feedback. And as Will said, they got fantastic feedback, which was really good and really appreciated by the students. But, you know, I very much appreciate that. I think it was probably too time consuming. And group feedback probably would have been equally well received by the students, I think. It happened to work out that when we got the feedback, it fitted very well with our own kind of formative / mock exams. So we fitted that feedback in with the feedback they were getting on those in one-to-one tutorials. So it was useful having really detailed feedback for them. And then overall, the feedback from the students was really positive. They all attended. They all enjoyed it, they all found it useful, and they all had something very positive to say about it. So I think from their perspective, it's certainly what they weren't being exploited in any way at all. It was really useful for them. So I think it was a good experience all round, really. So I hope that gives you kind of an idea of how to kind of, I think it was important that it was a part of the course. We made it part of the course. Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Just looking at the chat box, I think the Sam's question about motivation, Maddie answered very comprehensively. Eddie touched on the 2 points made by Karen and Graham about test security. The fact that, you know, will the tests go out there to outside of that kind of sample population? maybe you've got some solutions, Eddie, for that, for the security issue?
Yeah, it's funny that this question's come up because we've certainly grappled with this in the setup for the York-Liverpool pilot, and I think it comes. A lot of the questions we were grappling with was around transparency. So I think Kevin's put in there, presumably it's solved here. It's different institutions. Perhaps you don't need to say where the staff are coming from. And we were grappling with this. I don't know if others want to come in on this because they were at the coalface with this, but yeah, whether we tell the students or not where these teachers are coming from. I think we decided in the end we wanted to be transparent. Firstly, the students weren't interested. What the students were interested in was, I think, usually I find in my experience, is their own performance, how they're going to do, and whether this lesson's worthwhile for them. But when it comes to where they're from, I think we didn't go shouting it from the rooftops at every opportunity, but I think we were transparent enough for students to know if they wanted to know that these guys were from Liverpool. But yeah, it's a question, I suppose, for at the kind of local level, whether or not you tell the students where the partnering institution is from. I think this issue of security, there are different implications, whether it's face-to-face and online as well. I think it's a bit more challenging with it online. Most of my piloting has been face-to-face, and I find it's a lot. You've got that confidence that you're going in with the test papers and you're leaving with the test papers and you're taking all your notes with them. With it being online, it's a bit more challenging. You don't know what the students are doing on the other end. You don't know if screen recording's going on or what. I think it's very unlikely, you're in this kind of context that we're talking about, but you don't know. So there are security issues. But yeah, this question about how transparent you are about the institution and whether you let the students know, whether they know or not, it's a difficult one. I don't know if Rob, Will, or Maddie have any other thoughts on that, or anyone else.
Yeah, I'd just come in a little bit on that. Certainly when we were setting it up with the students, we didn't mention Liverpool. They knew it was another university. They knew it was another UK institution in a very similar situation to them. But we didn't actually mention Liverpool. I think it kind of got mentioned down the line, but students didn't ask. They didn't say, well, where. They really weren't that interested in exactly where. I think the fact that they just knew it was a similar kind of setup, similar situation to them, made them, it just sold the test to them, that it was a test that was worth them taking, and that they were going to get something out of it. So I'm not sure if that's not being transparent or not. We wouldn't have hidden it if they asked. And I think, it did come out, didn't it? I think one of the tutors mentioned which institution it was. But I don't know. I don't know what the kind of overarching kind of rules or ideas about this is. But personally, I can't see. I think the students would understand that we didn't really want them to know if they thought about it. I don't know what other people.
I agree, Maddie. Yeah, I think as Eddie said, it's kind of up to the local relationship between, to decide how much people want to say and how easily it would be traced back to a particular course and a particular test. Yeah, maybe that's something for discussion today when we go into our breakout rooms, that issue of transparency. Shall we move on to? Okay, great. We're going to have more time for questions and discussion in the breakout rooms. So before we go into breakout rooms to discuss how this test piloting network could work, we just wanted to share a few possibilities that we've discussed. So continuing with the Liverpool theme, this is the Lonely Hearts option. The idea is that somebody somewhere, maybe on a TAFSIG website or a Teams page that we create, people post adverts for what they're looking to pilot with a kind of minimum amount of information about the text and the context to make sure it's kind of got relevance there. So for example, this box at the bottom on the slide here is what our test advert at Liverpool would have looked like. So you see we've got kind of skill level task, students and the timing when we wanted to do the pilot. This is option one. I think Eddie's going to briefly talk about option two. Is that the help option?
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, this one doesn't. It might not kind of sound or look quite as fun. I mean, we don't have a favorite Beatles album on it just yet, but it's a kind of shared database, and perhaps as crude as it sounds, access to a shared spreadsheet almost. And this is a bit of a kind of hastily cobbled together prototype, if you like, of what it could possibly look like. But this could be slicker. It could tie in with Google Forms, for example. But essentially, those who sign up would give their contact details, although how we manage those, we'd have to think carefully about. What they're looking to pilot, so similar to what Rob's just gone through with his, you know, the skills, the level, it's not on here, but yeah, things like minimum information around the actual test itself, the components, the tasks. And then finally, briefly, something on what you can possibly offer in return, if anything. This would then enable those who are signed up to reach out and to initiate contact with a potential piloting partner and then build the relationship themselves. So it might be a bit more of a kind of fixed functional system compared to option 1. But it could be a blend of the two. It could be something completely different. And this is where we're wondering if you might have better ideas. And this is where we've got another Beatles album. And this is where help comes in, because we're going to be asking you for help now. And we want this to be driven by the users, by those who are interested in it, and use your insights and experience to find out how you think it could work best. So I think it's breakout room time, Rob, I believe.
Okay, so let's talk about the next steps now. Thanks everyone for your contribution, for your discussion. The group I was in had a great discussion, and we didn't write much down, but hopefully people will do that. As I said, we're hoping to use the notes from today to help us prepare the launch of the piloting network over the next few months. And if you have any other ideas about, you know, that come up after the session, please get in touch with us. Again, I've put our contact, I put our Twitter, email, and the mailing list. You can use any of those forums to get in touch with us. And we also have a coffee club, TAFSIG Coffee Club, next Friday. And I'm going to propose a room just to discuss piloting question testing issues. So if you're interested in carrying on the discussion, an informal discussion, just a chat, come along to the coffee club next Friday. Yes, so yeah, this is a network for all of us to use, so we really need your help to make it the best it can be. To adapt a popular song on Merseyside, you'll never test alone.